What is the true nature of war? Is it merely a tool of the state, or is it an inescapable force that defines the very essence of power? In The Art of War, Niccolò Machiavelli strips away any illusions of moral idealism and reveals war as the foundation upon which all political stability rests. It is not a tragedy to be avoided, nor a necessary evil. It is the very mechanism by which rulers secure and maintain their dominion. Without the capacity for war, a state is not merely weak, it is doomed to be subjugated by those who understand its brutal necessity. Machiavelli, with the precision of a master strategist, dismantles the naive notion that peace is the natural state of humanity. Peace, he argues, is merely an interlude between conflicts, a temporary illusion sustained by those who fail to recognize that power is inherently tied to force. He who controls the means of war controls the fate of nations. A ruler who neglects the art of war, who entrusts his safety to mercenaries or allies, who deludes himself into thinking that diplomacy alone can secure his sovereignty, is a ruler who invites his own downfall. The decay of a state begins the moment its leaders abandon martial discipline. History, according to Machiavelli, is littered with the corpses of once great civilizations that allowed their militaries to atrophy, trusting in the fleeting promises of treaties and the goodwill of their neighbors. The Romans, who mastered war, built an empire that lasted centuries. The Italians of Machiavelli's time, fragmented and complacent, had become prey for foreign powers. The lesson is clear. Those who wish to rule must not only prepare for war, but must make war a permanent concern of governance. A ruler must never deceive himself into believing that a well-trained army is merely an accessory to power. It is power itself. Without military strength, laws are meaningless, and governance is reduced to a fragile illusion that shatters at the first sign of external aggression. Machiavelli warns against the dangers of mercenary and auxiliary forces, which he deems the instruments of ruin for any state that relies upon them. Mercenaries fight not for loyalty or duty, but for coin, making them unreliable in times of true crisis. Auxiliaries, troops borrowed from another power, are even worse, for they place the state at the mercy of an external force that can easily become a conqueror rather than an ally. The only true defense, he insists, lies in a citizen militia, a military force composed of the very people who have a stake in the preservation of the state. History, Machiavelli asserts, provides countless examples of the fatal folly of placing trust in foreign arms. The Italian city-states, weakened by their dependence on mercenary captains, men who profited from prolonging wars rather than winning them, became easy prey for nations with disciplined standing armies. In contrast, the great powers of the past, such as Rome, flourished precisely because they cultivated a martial spirit within their own people. The citizens of a republic or principality must be trained in war, not only to defend their state from external threats, but to prevent internal decay. A society that loses its martial vigor does not merely risk conquest, it invites it. But Machiavelli does not stop at prescribing a strong, citizen-led military. He goes further, suggesting that war is not merely a tool for defense, but a means of expansion and stability. A ruler who waits for war to come to him has already ceded the advantage. True power lies in the ability to wage war on one's own terms, to strike preemptively before threats materialize, to shape the battlefield rather than be shaped by it. The greatest leaders in history, he argues, were those who understood this truth and acted upon it without hesitation or moral qualms. In a world where power is dictated by the sword, to abstain from war is to submit to those willing to wage it. War, then, is not an affliction to be cured, but a fundamental law of nature, a force that determines the fate of nations as surely as the tides shape the shores. Machiavelli does not ask whether war is just. Such concerns, he implies, belong to those who do not wield power. Instead, he asks whether a ruler understands war, whether he respects its ruthless logic, whether he is willing to embrace it as the only true guarantor of stability. Those who hesitate, those who cling to the illusion of peace, are not merely naive, they are doomed. It is not enough for a ruler to merely prepare for war in times of crisis. He must live it, breathe it, make it the foundation of his governance. He must study the histories of great conquerors, absorb the lessons of past battles, and ensure that his people are trained, disciplined, and always ready. A state that neglects the art of war in peacetime is a state that will find itself defenseless when war inevitably comes knocking. Machiavelli observes that fortune favors those who are prepared, those who act with decisive force rather than waiting for events to dictate their actions. Yet, there is an even deeper truth that underpins the art of war. Machiavelli suggests that a society's military structure is inextricably linked to its political character. A nation ruled by mercenaries will be weak, corrupt, and easily subjugated. A nation that arms its own people will be strong, free, and difficult to conquer. This is not a matter of ideology, but of survival. A republic that wishes to maintain its liberty must ensure that its citizens remain soldiers. For the moment they relinquish this duty, they also relinquish their claim to self-rule. The decay of military discipline is the precursor to political enslavement. It is no coincidence that Machiavelli lived in a time when Italy, fractured and leaderless, suffered under the ambitions of foreign powers. His warnings were not mere academic musings, but desperate prescriptions for a nation on the brink of ruin. The wars of Italy, the repeated humiliations at the hands of France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire were not accidents of fate, but the inevitable result of weakness. A nation that does not control its own arms does not control its own destiny. A ruler, therefore, must not only be armed, but must also shape the very soul of his people through the discipline of war. Machiavelli insists that the strength of a state is not measured by its wealth, its culture, or its laws, but by its capacity to defend itself through force. A nation that seeks to cultivate prosperity without military readiness is merely fattening itself for the slaughter. The idea that a flourishing economy or diplomatic cunning can replace the need for a strong army is to him a fatal delusion. Wealth without the means to protect it invites plunder. Treaties without the strength to enforce them are nothing but empty words. History has shown, time and time again, that the balance of power is dictated by those who are prepared to act with violence when necessary. Even the most virtuous republic, if it neglects war, will find itself at the mercy of despots and invaders who do not share its principles. Machiavelli reminds us of the fate of ancient Athens, a city of immense cultural and intellectual achievement, yet one that ultimately fell when it failed to maintain the military discipline necessary for survival. He contrasts this with Rome, a civilization that endured for centuries because it never allowed itself to grow complacent, always expanding its military strength even in times of peace. But Machiavelli is no mere historian. He is a strategist, a realist, and a prophet of power. He does not simply recount the failures of the past, he demands that his readers learn from them. The true statesman does not wait for war to find him. He wages it preemptively, ensuring that he remains the master of his own fate. He must always be prepared to seize opportunities, to strike before his enemies do, to manipulate fortune rather than be subjected to its whims. It is in this brutal clarity that Machiavelli's genius is most apparent. He does not concern himself with morality as others define it. He does not ask whether war is fair or whether rulers should seek peace for its own sake. Instead, he reduces governance to its most primal truth. Power belongs to those who are willing to fight for it. A republic that arms itself can remain free. A principality that keeps its people disciplined and ready for war can endure. But a state that turns away from the art of war, that believes in the comforting illusion of peace, will not merely fall, it will be erased from history. War, then, is not merely a tool of rulers, it is the force that shapes the destiny of all political entities. To govern is to recognize this fundamental truth and to act accordingly. Machiavelli does not propose war for its own sake, nor does he revel in bloodshed, but he understands that the alternative to strength is subjugation. A nation that does not master the art of war is not a nation at all, but a helpless body waiting to be devoured by those who do. It is not enough for a ruler to prepare for war in times of crisis. He must live in a state of perpetual readiness. He must never allow his armies to weaken, his people to grow soft, or his enemies to gain the advantage. It is not war that brings ruin to a state, but the failure to embrace war as a necessity of existence. Those who fear conflict invite destruction, while those who wield it as a weapon secure their own survival. This is why Machiavelli places such a strong emphasis on citizen armies. A ruler who relies on hired swords is a ruler who has already surrendered his fate to the whims of others. Mercenaries have no loyalty, no discipline beyond their pay, and will turn against their employer as soon as a more lucrative opportunity presents itself. Auxiliaries, troops borrowed from another power, are even worse, for they make a state dependent on the ambitions of foreign rulers. Only a well-trained militia, drawn from the ranks of the people, can ensure the security of a republic or principality. For if the people have a stake in the defense of their nation, they will fight not only with their bodies, but with their very souls. Machiavelli does not merely offer a philosophy of war, he offers a warning. He writes in a time when Italy is weak, fragmented, and at the mercy of foreign invaders. He sees firsthand the failure of leaders who place their trust in alliances, in mercenaries, in diplomacy without force to back it. He does not dream of an Italy ruled by scholars and merchants, but of an Italy that is feared, respected, and capable of defending itself. To achieve this, it must return to the wisdom of the ancients, to the martial strength of Rome, to the understanding that power is born from the sword and maintained by its constant readiness. A ruler who ignores these lessons is not merely foolish, he is suicidal. For war will come, whether he wishes for it or not. The only question is whether he will be its master or its victim. A ruler must therefore not only prepare for war, but cultivate a society that understands its necessity. Machiavelli warns against the comforts of luxury, which weaken the spirit of a people and make them incapable of defending their freedom. A nation that grows too accustomed to ease, too trusting in diplomacy, too reliant on wealth rather than force, will soon find itself conquered by those who have not abandoned the martial virtues. Fortune favors the disciplined, the prepared, the relentless. It does not smile upon those who believe that laws and institutions alone can preserve their sovereignty. Without arms, laws are nothing but fragile words written on paper, waiting to be burned by the first invading army. Machiavelli despises complacency, and his words strike with the force of a warning bell tolling before an inevitable storm. He writes not for those who wish to believe in the illusion of lasting peace, but for those who understand that stability is built upon the foundation of military strength. There is no safety in inaction, only in the will to act decisively, to strike before one is struck, to embrace war not as a horror, but as the necessary condition of survival. Rome, the eternal empire, understood this truth. It did not wait for its enemies to gather strength. It crushed them before they could become threats. It expanded its power not through empty treaties, but through disciplined armies and the calculated use of force. The Romans did not shy away from war. They lived it, studied it, and perfected it. It was this martial excellence that ensured their dominance for centuries. In contrast, the Italy of Machiavelli's time had become a broken land, divided by weak rulers who placed their trust in mercenaries and foreign aid, rather than in the strength of their own people. The consequences of this weakness were obvious: endless invasions, humiliations, and subjugation. The lessons are clear, yet they are lessons that rulers too often forget. They delude themselves into believing that alliances will protect them, that wealth will buy security, that treaties will prevent war. But war is not a force that can be bargained with. It is an inevitable reality that only the strong can control. Those who fail to master it will be crushed beneath the boots of those who do. Machiavelli does not ask whether war is just. He does not concern himself with whether a ruler should desire peace. He speaks only of what is real, what is necessary. And the reality is this: power belongs to those who are ready to seize it, and history does not remember the weak. To reject war is to reject power itself. Machiavelli's The Art of War is not a book for the hopeful, nor for those who dream of a world ruled by reason and goodwill. It is a book for those who understand that survival is a brutal contest, that politics is not governed by morality, but by strength, and that peace is never more than a temporary pause between conflicts. A ruler who does not shape his own fate through force will have his fate dictated by those who do. The greatest mistake a leader can make is to assume that fortune alone will secure his rule. Fortune is fickle, blind, and indifferent. It may favor a ruler for a time, but when it turns, when war comes, as it always does, only those who are prepared will endure. It is not chance that makes a state powerful, nor wealth, nor the supposed wisdom of its advisors. It is the ability to wield force effectively, to make war an instrument of stability rather than a force of destruction. Machiavelli does not advocate for chaos. He does not revel in the idea of endless war for its own sake. His vision is far more pragmatic. War is not an aberration, but the natural state of human affairs. To embrace this truth is not to seek destruction, but to ensure survival. The ruler who understands this can shape his own destiny. The one who ignores it will be shaped by the ambitions of others. Italy, in Machiavelli's time, had already suffered the consequences of forgetting these lessons. It had become a land torn apart by foreign powers, its cities looted, its people ruled by outsiders. This was not the result of misfortune. It was the inevitable fate of those who abandoned the art of war, who allowed their strength to wither while their enemies sharpened their blades. His warnings were not merely academic. They were a desperate plea for his homeland to awaken from its complacency before it was too late. But Machiavelli's words remain as relevant now as they were then. Nations still rise and fall according to the same brutal logic. Power still belongs to those willing to seize it. War still dictates the fate of rulers, whether they wish to accept it or not. The world does not reward the passive, nor does it spare those who put their trust in fragile illusions. The lesson of the art of war is simple, undeniable, and cruel. In the struggle for power, only the strong survive. Subscribe to the channel if you seek the truth beyond illusions.